Most people who pass their soul's most painful test don't notice when it happens. They don't wake up to a parade or a trumpet. They wake to a quiet, almost unremarkable morning. The kettle hums, the window fogs, the phone is face down. And yet something fundamental has changed. The hook that used to catch you no longer catches. The name that made you flinch lands like a feather. The memory that pulled you under releases. And you rise. If you felt even a single breath of recognition just now, stay with me. Tonight we were going to trace the delicate seams of psychic healing the way a conservator studies a repaired vase. Lightly, carefully, honestly, so that by the end you can say with clarity, not bravado, I have passed through my hardest valley and I know the signs that prove it. This episode is about the moment after the storm, the kind Jung spent a lifetime helping people recognize, the passages when a person stops being lived by their pain and begins to live with it as a wise companion. In the next half hour, I can share 7 subtle but unmistakable signs that your deepest trial has completed its task in you, and how to stabilize that transformation so it becomes a way of being rather than a weekend mood. If you're new here, welcome to Deep Psyche Lab, where we translate the language of depth psychology into everyday life. If you're returning, you already know, we don't do hot takes, we keep to warm truth. If learning to read your inner weather matters to you, take a second to subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. And if at any point a sentence lands for you, press like. It helps this work find the people who need it. As you listen, I invite you to hold a phrase in your heart and eventually in the comments. I carry what once carried me. That's our touchstone tonight. Let's begin with a picture. Imagine you have been walking with a stone in your shoe for years. You adjusted your gait to accommodate it, your calf grew tight, your hip learned to rotate a millimeter differently, your spine set itself against the world. The day you finally remove the stone, you expect to sprint, but your body has grown around the problem. The ground has become suspicious. You take careful steps. Healing is like that. We think the absence of pain is the sign of change. Often the first sign is the return of curiosity. In Jung's language, curiosity signals the ego's renewed willingness to meet the self, the deeper organizing intelligence of the psyche, without bargaining. It is the what now that isn't frantic. You begin to look around again, not to check for threats, but because you want to see. If that image feels close, notice what has already begun in you. A person who has passed their soul's hardest test is not a person who has eliminated their shadow, their complex, their grief. It is a person who can sit with what once dominated them and say, I know your name. Jung described the complex, the knot of feeling and memory that pulls us out of control, as having autonomy. It behaves like a little personality inside us. When the test is at its peak, that complex hijacks the steering wheel. Afterward, it sits in the passenger seat with a seatbelt on, still vocal, still vivid, but not in charge. The measure of your healing is not that you never feel the old fear, but that when you do, your hands remain open on the wheel. You can tell you breathe through the hardest stretch when the same old trigger shows up and you find yourself pausing, genuinely curious about the story underneath rather than reenacting it. Someone is late and you don't instantly become 9 years old, waiting at a window for a car that never arrives. Instead, you catch the image forming and you breathe. The breath is not a technique. It is a sign that you're in relationship with the once invisible child in you, that you can give them the attention they needed without dragging a stranger into your old scene. This is what Jung meant by becoming conscious. The image moves from acting us out to being seen by us. The pause you feel is not empty. It is full of your own presence. Another sign. Your dreams change. For months or years maybe, you had recurring dream motifs, choking hallways, failing brakes, locked rooms, water rising toward the stairs. Then one night, the hallway widens, or a window opens, or you find a key in your palm. You might wake without fireworks, but a subtle peace lingers, like dust settling in a museum after the last visitor leaves. Jung called dreams the royal road to the unconscious, not because they flatter us, but because they show us the configuration of our inner world with ruthless economy. When the soul's hardest test completes a cycle, Your dreams make small architectural adjustments. The monster isn't slain, it reshapes. Perhaps it removes its mask and becomes a teacher, or it collapses and reveals a child. When you carry the memory of such a dream into the day and notice you no longer need to perform as the invulnerable one or the perpetual victim, you're seeing a map update in real time. Listen for the new voice inside you. Before, when something went wrong, a familiar barb would stab, "Of course. You always ruin things." Afterward, there is a second voice, not sugary, not pretending the wheel didn't come off, but lucid and kind. "This hurts, and you know how to tend to hurt now." This is the inner figure Jung called the self, the organizing center and circumference of the psyche, finally audible over the noise of panic. You could also call it conscience in its original sense. A knowing with. A person who has passed the test knows with themselves. They no longer argue themselves into the ground. You can feel it in how you speak. The sentences shorten. The hedging falls away. You begin to say simple, true things without bracing for punishment. There's a practical sign, too, and it often surprises people. Your boundaries soften at the edges because their core has strengthened. When we're in the middle of our test, boundaries tend to be either paper-thin or ironclad. We ghost or we barricade. When the psyche integrates what it has learned, boundaries become like healthy fascia, flexible, responsive, alive. You can say no without bitterness and yes without a hidden ledger. You recognize that a boundary is not a wall to keep the world out, but a membrane that preserves exchange without contamination. Jung would say that the opposites have learned to talk to each other. The part of you that longs to be generous can now sit with the part that needs to be safe, and they make an agreement based on reality rather than fear. And then there is time. When you were inside the ordeal, time had two speeds, too fast to catch or too slow to endure. After you pass through, time acquires a human scale again. You stop counting days since the breakup, hours since the loss, minutes since the last panic. You measure in seasons. That was winter, and now it's early spring. Jung loved seasons as metaphors because he believed the psyche moves in organic rhythms, not mechanical schedules. If you notice you're no longer asking, "When will I be over this?" but instead wondering, "What is this season asking of me?" You've stepped out of the courtroom and into the garden. That shift from verdict to cultivation is a signature of passage. Relationships reveal the next sign with painful clarity. When you have passed your hardest test, you stop selecting people to reenact your trauma. You start selecting people who can witness your life. Not perfect people. Witnesses. Your conversations tilt from proving to sharing, from tests to invitations. You recognize a subtle tell. When someone offers love with a hook in it, your body refuses to bite. You feel the hook, and instead of arguing about whether it exists, you honor your body's intelligence. Jung named this intelligence feeling. He did not mean sentiment. He meant the function that evaluates value. A mature feeling function says, "This is good for me," or "This costs me my soul." When your soul has passed its most painful test, that function becomes trustworthy again. You don't outsource your yes or your no. Let's name the test more directly, a soul. S most painful test is usually some variation of this. Can you love without abandoning yourself? Can you tell the truth without annihilating another? Can you grieve without drowning? Forgive without forgetting? Start over without erasing who you've been? Each of those questions used to split you down the middle. You would flip between extremes, self-sacrifice or selfishness, silence or explosion, numbness or flooding, rigid loyalty to the past or manic reinvention. Jung called this violent swinging between poles and antiodromia, the running into the opposite. When you're through the deepest part of the test, the swing slows. You still feel the pull, but you don't snap across the spectrum. You pivot. You pivot toward a third thing, and that third thing is a synthesis that didn't exist for you before. Jung called that the transcendent function, the creative leap that emerges when you refuse to betray either pole. You feel its arrival like a sudden clearing. There it is. I can stay with myself and remain connected. I can be firm and still be warm. That sentence is not a technique. It's a birth certificate. Another sign is quiet, but revolutionary. You become a better listener to your symptoms. When your heart tightens or your stomach drops, you don't shame or override your body. You ask, "What are you saying?" The answer arrives in images. Your fatigue might be a house with every light burning at once, demanding you turn off the rooms you're not using. Your anxiety might be a child tugging your sleeve, asking you to go back and pick up a promise you made and then neglected. In Jungian practice, we call this active imagination, dialogue with the living images of your psyche. You don't need a ritual. You need sincerity. Set aside 5 minutes, close your eyes, invite the symptom to take a form, and ask it what it wants you to know. People who have passed their test don't stop using these practices once the crisis lifts. They become their hygiene. Just as you brush your teeth regardless of whether you ate sugar, you tend your images regardless of whether you're in pain. Healing becomes maintenance, not drama. There is a social sign, too, and it's deceptively simple. You stop evangelizing your pain. When we are in the thick of it, we recruit others to our suffering the way a lonely traveler looks for a familiar flag. We tell and retell the same story, hoping repetition will deliver resolution. Afterward, you still tell your story, but it becomes particular rather than universal, offered rather than wielded. You don't need your pain to justify you. You allow it to contextualize you. People close to you will tell you that you're easier to be with, not because you've become cheerful, but because you are available. Your presence is not filled with the pressure to be understood. It is shaped by the willingness to understand. Watch what happens to your creativity. It returns, though not necessarily in the form you had before. Maybe you used to write and now you garden. Maybe you used to run and now you cook. Creativity is less about output and more about participation in life's unfolding. Jung would say that the self finds ways to express its pattern in the world, and when the blockage clears, expression finds you. You all know this has happened because you all catch yourself doing something for no good reason except that it feels right, and then you'll notice the old inner prosecutor is strangely quiet. There will be fewer trials about whether you're allowed to enjoy the afternoon. The day's light will have texture again. Your attention, which had been clenched, will open like a hand. Another sign that often frightens people at first. You become less interested in predicting the future and more interested in meeting it. In the heart of the ordeal, we hunger for certainty. We ask for signs not because we love meaning, but because we fear chaos. After the passage, signs still matter. Synchronicities occur. Patterns show themselves, but you receive them as guidance rather than guarantees. Jung loved synchronicity because it suggested that we live in a meaningful cosmos, not a mechanical accident. Yet he also warned against becoming superstitious. When you have integrated your test, you can hold a sign lightly. You can say that was meaningful without immediately drafting a contract with fate. That lightness is trust, not the naive trust that nothing bad will happen, but the mature trust that whatever happens, you have become a worthy companion to yourself. Let's talk about anger and forgiveness because there's confusion here. A person who has passed their most painful test rarely becomes dull or endlessly accommodating. They often become sharper, but the sharpness is clean. Anger arrives like a bell, concise and clarifying. You speak up sooner, not louder. You place accountability where it belongs, and you stop using rage to keep grief at bay. Forgiveness becomes a decision to stop drinking from the poisoned well, not a decision to hand the well back to the person who poisoned it. You know you've crossed over when you can say, "I release the story that you owe me the lost years," and mean it. And you back that statement by no longer spending this year collecting evidence for last year as trial. You may notice an architectural change in your inner language. Where you used to say, "I am broken," you now say, "A brokenness happened to me." The shift seems semantic, but it restores agency without denying injury. It disentangles identity from event. Jung often emphasized this. We must suffer our fate without identifying with it. When a person passes their test, they can hold their scars and their essence in the same hand. The scar is proof of survival. The essence is proof of continuity. You become less fascinated with diagnosing yourself and more committed to devoting yourself. Devotion to what? To the small, ordinary acts that tether you to meaning. Keeping a promise, washing the cup, returning the book, writing the paragraph you said you'd write. Healing, at scale, is the art of keeping your word to your life. If you want a simple exercise to test where you are, try this. Remember a scene from the worst of it. Bring it into focus. The room, the emails, the voice raised, the tears that wouldn't come or wouldn't stop. Now slowly add yourself to the memory. Not the you who was fused with the scene, but the you who is listening right now. Bring that you into the room and place a hand on your own shoulder. Say the words you needed then. Ask the you in the scene what they want from you now. If you can do this without contempt, you have crossed a threshold. If you can do it with tenderness, you've built a home. Jung called this the integration of the shadow, not because the shadow becomes light, but because the light learns how to include darkness without being extinguished. There will be days when you doubt all of this. You'll wake up and the grief will be loud again, or the panic will stroll in at noon and sit at your desk. You will wonder if anything actually changed, or if you simply distracted yourself long enough to forget. On those days, look not at how you feel, but at how you respond. Your feelings are weather, your responses are climate. Did you reach for the old numbing ritual, or did you text a friend and take a walk? Did you collapse into the story that nothing works for you, or did you open a window and breathe for 2 minutes before you decided the next right thing? The difference between who you were and who you are becoming may be as small as that window. Remember, the psyche respects small faithful acts more than grand gestures. As you gather these signs inside you, notice the temptation to make them into a checklist. The soul doesn't pass tests like a schoolchild. It passes through them like a river through a valley, shaping stone as it goes. Your signs will be unique. Maybe your sign is that you can finally hold your father's photograph without going cold. Maybe it's that you stopped reading the comments at midnight. Maybe it's that you returned the key. The point is not to perform healing for an audience. It is to live it in your chest. Jung warned about inflation, the ego swelling with spiritual achievement. The antidote is humility, married to precision. Name what changed. Give thanks. Keep going. If you're still listening, I suspect something in you knows or wants to know. Take a second and press, like if this episode is helping you track your own turning. It tells the algorithm to bring more people to the table who are hungry for depth. And if you're new, consider subscribing to Deep Psyche Lab and turning on notifications, because we release episodes designed to meet you where you are and walk with you a few steps further. There is a paradox I want to leave with you before we gather everything up. Many people assume that passing their hardest test will make them more certain. Often it makes them more honest. Honesty is different. Certainty likes to close a door. Honesty likes to open a window. After the passage, you're allowed to say, "I don't know," and remain at peace. Jung believed that the self has a wisdom that exceeds our planning. After you survive the initiation, you don't become a master of outcomes. You become intimate with guidance. Your prayers, if you pray, become shorter and truer. Your meditations, if you meditate, become less about perfect stillness and more about real contact. Your science, if you are a scientist, becomes more rigorous because you're no longer trying to bend data to soothe your fear. Everywhere, the same principle shows up. The world is allowed to be what it is because you are finally allowed to be who you are. If you want a phrase to practice in your daily life, try this one when the old wave rises. I can feel this and still choose. Short, true, portable. It brings your agency back online without denying your tenderness. Write it down and place it where your hand lands first thing in the morning. In Jungian terms, that sentence keeps the ego in respectful dialogue with the self. It doesn't surrender the wheel, and it doesn't white-knuckle it either. It reminds you that you are in partnership with a larger pattern that wants your wholeness, not your performance. Now let's gather the signs we've been circling, not as a list to memorize, but as a field to walk through again. You know you've passed your soul's most painful test when curiosity returns, and you can look around without scanning for attack. You know it when your dreams loosen, offering exits where there were none. You hear it when a calm inner voice speaks near the heat of the moment, and you trust it enough to obey. You feel it when boundaries become membranes, firm, living, not brittle. You experience time as seasonal again, not as a sentence. You choose witnesses over reenactments, and your yes and no belong to you. You negotiate the opposites without slamming between them, discovering creative third ways. You listen to your symptoms as messengers and keep tending your inner images. You stop evangelizing your pain and start offering your presence. Your creativity returns in any form that lets life pass through you. You treat signs as guidance, not contracts. Your anger becomes clean, your forgiveness honest. Your language shifts from identity as wound to identity with scar and essence. On bad days, you look at your response rather than your weather. And across all of it, you are less interested in proving you're healed and more interested in being here. If even 2 or 3 of those resonate, that is plenty. The soul is not a product, it is a pilgrimage. Before we close, let me speak to the part of you that suspects you haven't passed anything at all, that worries you're pretending, that fears you'll be exposed. That voice is trying to keep you safe. Thank it, then tell it the truth. There is no medal to collect and no exam proctor. There is only the life you are quietly rebuilding each day you choose to be faithful to what you know now. The pain you carried taught you a grammar of attention. You notice who needs water. You slow down when you see fatigue in a friend's eyes. You walk yourself home when you're tempted to wander. You have become, in the best way, unsurprising to yourself. Not boring, reliable. Jung would call that character. The world recognizes it even when it doesn't applaud. And you recognize yourself, which matters more. If you want to anchor this passage in a single practice tonight, try this when you lie down. Place one hand on your chest and one on your belly. Breathe until you can feel both hands moving. Then speak quietly, as if introducing old friends. Body meet breath. Breath meet body. We've been through enough together to trust each other now. Do it for 60 seconds. You're not trying to engineer a state. You're acknowledging a relationship. The body forgives slowness. It rewards sincerity. The soul hears in those small, repeatable gestures that you're staying. If this episode helped you name even one sign with clarity, I'd love to hear it. Tell me in the comments, "I carry what once carried me," and add a sentence about the moment you noticed a real change. Your story might be the map someone else needs tonight. If you haven't yet, tap like, it genuinely helps, and subscribe to the Deep Psyche Lab channel with notifications on so you all know when the next episode drops. We explore Jung with a lamp in one hand and your real life in the other. This channel is educational and not a substitute for therapy. To recap the heart of it in a single line, passing your soul. Its most painful test is not about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming trustworthy to yourself. You don't stop feeling, you stop fleeing. And in that stillness, your life resumes its true size. Thank you for being here, for your attention, for your courage. Until next time, keep the small promises that keep you whole. And remember, the quiet morning when the hook no longer catches is not a dream. It is the sound of your life coming back.